Today's episode is brought to you by Teach Hanley. There's an idea that exists that at some point in history, the church suppressed several texts and shielded our eyes from some of the more dubious and salacious antics of biblical characters. Supposedly, the figures who have been a mainstay influence for countless of generations possess a darker, more insidious side to them, and those who have since been perceived as perfect and pious are actually flawed and depraved. So according to this idea, the church sought to cover up the fables that might ruin their saviours. They banned certain books, burned volumes in masse, and in some cases buried the contents of these darkly delectable texts in unmarked areas of the desert. So what were they trying to hide? Some ideas include the secret childhood of Jesus, that portrays the Messiah as a sociopathic brat, the secret family that Jesus maintained in his final years, or maybe the more controversial stories like the Gospel of Judas, that paints the treacherous follower as more of a hero. The ideas and conspiracies are endless, and whether the suppression of these texts was an attempt to stamp out Gnosticism, or because certain content contradicted other more popular ideas, these books were not meant to be read. Until now. Before we get started with today's episode, a brief message from the sponsor of today's video, Teach Hanley. If you're looking for a skincare routine that's uncomplicated, affordable, and effective, then Teach Hanley's skincare program is probably the way to go. Teach Hanley have several products available that specialize in various parts of your skin. I recommend starting with Teach Hanley's Level 1 system, which comes with a daily face wash to get rid of dirt and grime, an exfoliating scrub to get rid of dead skin cells, a daytime moisturizer with SPF 20 to protect your skin from the sun, and an evening moisturizer to keep your skin hydrated throughout the night. The great thing about Teach Hanley is that every box comes with an instructional card that tells you exactly how to apply each of their products, when to use them, and how much you should be using. The process of achieving healthy skin has never been easier. Implementing a quality skincare program into your morning and evening routine will do wonders for your skin, and take it from me, a great skincare service like Teach Hanley will have you feeling fresher, confident, and ready to face the day. With over 5,000 5-star reviews on their website from satisfied customers around the world, you can trust that Teach Hanley's skincare program works. In addition to amazing skin, Teach Hanley members can get tons of benefits, including 20% off retail prices, the ability to customize your order box, exclusive monthly deals, and free US shipping. For skincare you can trust, go to teachhanley.com/thelegendsofhistory. Or use my exclusive link in the description below to receive 30% off your first box and a free gift. And now back to today's episode. In the first 100 years of the Common Era, there wasn't just one version of Christianity. There were a myriad of beliefs circulating at the time, some of which were more akin to the version we recognize today, and others that were a bit more out there, and arguably more creative with its imagery and content. One of these beliefs that was popular in the pre-Christian era was Gnosticism, something which many of you have likely heard of before. In a very basic explanation, Gnosticism was deemed to be a heretical movement that taught that the world was created and ruled by a lesser deity known as the demiurge, and that Jesus was an emissary of the supreme being, that which we would recognize as God, who enabled the redemption of man's spirit. I bring this up because many people believe that the Gospel of Thomas, the subject of today's video, is what you would call a Gnostic text, a text belonging to an early, more heretical Christianity. Indeed, many of the texts that are banned or were suppressed by the church were indeed Gnostic in origin. But these types of texts usually contain some outlandish supernatural elements, such as the aforementioned demiurge, the archons, or the aeons. Another reason why the Gospel of Thomas may have been considered a Gnostic text was because when it was unearthed in 1945 in Nag Hammadi, an Egyptian village, it was found amongst 12 other large books that would form the Nag Hammadi codices. Amongst these books were several Gnostic texts, including the Apocryphon of John and the Apocalypse of James, that had been possibly buried sometime in the 4th century, by either those trying to hide and preserve the texts, or by those trying to suppress them. With this, the inclusion of the Gospel of Thomas within the Nag Hammadi codices kind of made it guilty by association, despite not actually containing much of the more wild things that occur in those types of books. the Gospel of Thomas is luckily preserved in a single Coptic text, that is, an ancient Egyptian language. Whilst unconfirmed, it's theorized that this text is likely a translation of an early Greek version that was written in the 1st or 2nd century. As opposed to the more complex narratives found in most Gnostic texts, the Gospel of Thomas merely contains 114 sayings, otherwise known as logia, the Greek word for sayings, or logion in its singular form, that Jesus was believed to have said. Much like Matthew, Mark, Luke and John's Gospels, the Gospel of Thomas provides us with various wisdoms that were supposedly uttered by Jesus himself, and whilst these sayings are not necessarily structured in a narrative format, you might be interested to see what some deem is a lost set of truths, and an independent source that was privy to Jesus' words. Some have even found some validity in the wording of the text, believing that certain Coptic and Greek sentences of the Gospel of Thomas appear far older when compared to the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. Some historians therefore believe that when trying to decide what a historical Jesus would have truly said, the language used in the Gospel of Thomas offers a more reliable account. However, considering the content of the Gospel of Thomas being just sayings of Jesus, it doesn't really tell us much about historical Israel, or about Jesus himself. And whilst the wording of the text might appear to be independent of the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, it's impossible to determine which came first, or which is a more reliable account. The Gospel of Thomas, as you might have guessed, was supposedly written by Thomas the Apostle, one of Jesus' disciples. Perhaps Thomas's most memorable act in the Bible is his doubting of Jesus' resurrection, and his requiring of physical proof that Jesus had truly been reborn. This would give rise to the popular term doubting Thomas, which could be used to describe someone who didn't have faith. When Jesus does return, it is Thomas who is specifically asked by Jesus to touch his wounds, and when he does, he realizes the truth and becomes one of the first people to explicitly acknowledge Jesus' divinity. Beyond this, it was Thomas who was believed to be the man who first brought early Christianity to the eastern lands of Syria, Mesopotamia, and even India. So despite not being as famous as Matthew, Mark, Luke and John amongst Jesus' disciples, Thomas still got about. Furthermore, there are several texts or apocrypha that are either supposedly written by Thomas or written for him, one most notably being the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, which appears to have Thomas explaining what Jesus was like as a child. Most of these texts involving Thomas appear to have sprung up sometime between the 1st and 2nd century, and whilst they didn't make it into the Bible, likely on the account of them either being forgeries or Gnostic in nature, they still contain a lot of value when determining the beliefs and culture of these early Christian groups. As previously mentioned, the Gospel of Thomas has 114 sayings, some of which are nearly identical to the sayings in Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. However, as aforementioned, some scholars have decided that the language used in the Gospel is older, and therefore it is difficult to say which came first, and thus, which was more likely to have come from the mouth of a historical Jesus. However, as we'll come to realise of the Gospel of Thomas, there are many references to the human spirit, as well as many teachings that encourage the merging of the body and soul. Many of the teachings here are quite specific, and though they may line up with the words of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, Thomas does present us with some new concepts, those that are not congruent or perhaps even contradictory of the Bible's teachings. It's important to bear this in mind when reading the Gospel of Thomas. Though there are some areas that can be quite compelling, there are some areas where the possible Gnostic influence paints the text with an almost non-biblical nature. The text begins with a prologue telling us, "These are the hidden sayings that the living Jesus spoke, and Didymus Judas Thomas wrote down." According to early Christian traditions, it was believed that Didymus Judas Thomas was the twin brother of Jesus. In traditional beliefs, of course, this is not the case, and whilst he may still be considered a twin, it is a twin of someone else, not Jesus. Interestingly, if we look at the etymology of Didymus Judas Thomas, we can find that Didymus is the Greek word for twin, whilst Thomas in Aramaic also could be identified as the word twin. So going by this early Christian tradition, Jesus had a twin brother, who was essentially Thomas, and Thomas recorded the following words sometime during Jesus' historical existence. Saying 1. True meaning. And he said, whoever discovers the meaning of these texts won't taste death. The first saying is pretty self-explanatory, with Jesus declaring that by understanding his very words as told to us in this gospel, the reader will either achieve immortality or more likely will achieve a state of being that renders them unafraid of death. Another idea is that death here should not be taken literally, or that it should be attributed to the spiritual death, in that by understanding the words, the reader will never lose faith again. Such a saying is quite similar to the Gospel of John 8:51, where Jesus declares, "If anyone keeps my word, he will never see death." As previously mentioned, there are many sayings in the Gospel of Thomas that have their parallels in the canonical Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Saying 2. Seek and find. Jesus said, whoever seeks shouldn't stop until they find. When they find, they'll be disturbed. When they're disturbed, they'll be amazed, and reign over the all. Here, Jesus appears to explain that those who are looking for answers to questions should never stop in their search. He also cautions that those who find what they're looking for should be prepared to be disturbed by the truth, possibly a specific caution to a non-believer, and that once they are confronted with the truth, and are able to accept the truth, they will be secondarily amazed by it. The text is broken here, however, and so we can only make educated guesses as to its true meaning. Saying 3. Seeking within. Jesus said, if your leaders tell you, look, the kingdom is in heaven, then the birds of heaven will precede you. If they tell you it's in the sea, then the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is within you and outside of you. When you know yourselves, then you'll be known, and you'll realize that you're the children of the living Father. But if you don't know yourselves, then you live in poverty, and you are the poverty. Here, Jesus seems to tell Thomas that if you are told where the heaven is, i.e. the sky or the sea, then the birds or the fish will have priority over you, for these are their domains. However, if you find the heaven within yourself, that is to say, if you find true peace internally, then you will realize that you are a child of God, and come to understand that there is little else you need. There's a degree of self-reliance promoted here in Jesus telling Thomas to essentially ignore leaders when they speak, for it is better to trust yourself. It might also be poking fun at religious leaders who claim to know God or the heavens, for Jesus explains that those things are already inside of us. He also adds that it is imperative to know yourself, or in this case, to know God, and to be without that is to know the truest poverty. This isn't poverty in an economic sense, but more so in a spiritual sense, implying that those without God are really the poor ones. He actually exemplifies this point by saying these people won't just know poverty, they are the poverty. Saying 4. First and last. Jesus said the older person won't hesitate to ask a little 7-year-old child about the place of life, and they'll live, because many who are first will be last, and they'll become one. In this saying, it might seem strange that Jesus tells Thomas that a man who has lived a full life might ask an infant as to one's place in life. After all, the infant cannot speak and has no contextual awareness of anything, let alone something as profound as one's place in life. Yet in such an action, we can recognize respect and humbleness in the old man, that he is not judgmental nor skeptic merely because of a person's age. He does not assume to know any better than the young babe, simply because he is older, and he does not place himself above the infant in any conceivable way. In essence, the old man recognizes that all are equal, and that everyone, in a religious sense, is a child of God. Additionally, the Gospel of Thomas later leans into the idea that children are the most pure, given that they have not been corrupted by life, and so in some way, they are the ones who are most wise when it comes to matters on life. Saying 5. Hidden and revealed. Jesus said, know what's in front of your face, and what's hidden from you will be revealed to you, because there's nothing hidden that won't be revealed. In this saying, Jesus tells Thomas that there is no need to concern oneself with what is hidden, perhaps the mysteries of God and life itself. Every curiosity that man has will be answered, whether through prayer or through the mortal death, when a soul reaches the heavens. Instead, Jesus advises Thomas to focus on the here and now, for that is what is important, not the hypothetical or the unknowable. Saying 6. Public ritual. His disciples said to him, "Do you want us to fast? And how should we pray? Should we make donations? And what food shall we avoid?" Jesus said, "Don't lie, and don't do what you hate, because everything is revealed in the sight of heaven. For there's nothing hidden that won't be revealed, and nothing covered up that will stay secret." What we see in saying 6 is Jesus' disciples interrupt his conversation with Thomas, where they ask him what is the best way to live their life, or perhaps more accurately, how can they guarantee their place in God's good books? But interestingly, Jesus calls them out for their hypocrisy, telling them not to lie and not to do the things they hate, because if they do all the things that are told to them with the wrong attitude, God will know, and he will know that their actions were done without integrity. In a sense, Jesus is telling his disciples that if they hate praying, hate making donations, or hate fasting, then they shouldn't even bother. These things should be done willingly and without begrudging, and they should be true reflections of a person's humility and charity. Saying 7. The lion and the human. Jesus said, "Blessed is the lion that's eaten by a human, and then becomes human. But how awful for the human who's eaten by a lion and the lion becomes human." Here, Jesus tells Thomas that an animal is blessed when it's eaten by a human, but conversely, the human is cursed when it's eaten by an animal. The point of this saying seems to be that if a lion is eaten by a man, the lion becomes a part of the man. It is risen to a state of being that is moral and humane. Whereas if the man is eaten by the man becomes a part of the lion and is demoted to a lower status than was originally intended. He is no longer living out his life as God had planned, and instead reduced to serving as the lion. In some sense, it is not that we are what we eat, but that what we eat becomes us. Saying 8. The parable of the fish. He said, "The human being is like a wise fisher who cast a net into the sea, and drew it up from the sea full of little fish. Among them the wise fisher found a fine large fish, and cast all the little fish back down into the sea, easily choosing the large fish. Anyone who has ears to hear should hear." In this saying, it might be said that Jesus is using the wise fisher as an allegory for God. Like the wise fisher who chooses to keep the fine large fish before casting the little fish back into the sea, God will choose to keep the fine humans who have lived good lives, and will cast back those who have not. In some sense, you may also compare this saying to the more common quality over quantity. Saying 9. The parable of the sower. Jesus said, "Look, a sower went out, took a handful of seeds and scattered them. Some fell on the roadside. The birds came and gathered them. Others fell on the rock. They didn't take root in the soil, and ears of grain didn't rise toward heaven. Yet others fell on thorns. They choked the seeds, and the worms ate them. Finally, others fell on good soil. It produced fruit up toward heaven, some 60 times as much, and some 120. To some, this can be interpreted as another version of the parable of the sower, or the parable of the 4 soils, as found in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Its meaning, however, is not entirely clear. It might be argued that once more, the focal character, the sower, is an allegory for God, and as the sower scatters seeds upon the earth, God scatters human souls. Some of these souls, like seeds, turn bad, misfortune happens to them, or they simply do not prosper. But others produce fruit, or do very good things, and end up closer to heaven. Saying 10. Jesus said, "I've cast fire on the world, and look, I'm watching over it until it blazes." A similar saying exists in the Gospel of Luke, where we are told, "I came to cast fire on the earth, and how I wish that it were already kindled." Here in Luke's version, Jesus intended to cast the world on fire, and wished it was already kindled. But in Thomas's version, however, Jesus has already cast the world on fire and watches over it until it blazes. The fire in this saying has a few interpretations. It may be representative of the judgment that would befall the sinners in the end times, or it may be representative of the power of the Holy Spirit, in that it could only come about after Jesus had accomplished his work. The fire may also be representative of the spreading of good news and the reach of his word across the world. Others believe that the fire in this saying refers to the resurrection, with the crucifixion being the spark which led to the world being engulfed in Jesus' message. Saying 11, those who are living won't die. Jesus said, this heaven will disappear, and the one above it will disappear too. Those who are dead aren't alive, and those who are living won't die. In the days when you ate what was dead, you made it alive. When you're in the light, what will you do? On the day when you were one, you became divided. But when you become divided, what will you do? Here we understand that two planes of heaven will disappear. Presumably, a third plane being God's realm will remain. The next 2 points, that those who are dead aren't alive and those who are living won't die, may seem pretty redundant statements. But they may also serve to mean that those who aren't alive are the ones who are not living their lives as they should be. Meanwhile, those who won't die are those who have done enough to be remembered, that they have left such a positive impact on the world that they will live forever, whether this be through one's legacy or in God's glory. When Jesus speaks of becoming divided after being one, it might be in reference to the spirit of a child, that is to say, complete innocence. It is when we grow up and learn the ways of the world and become divided by obligations and temptations that we are no longer as we were. Saying 12, James the Just. The disciples said to Jesus, we know you're going to leave us. Who will lead us then? Jesus said to them, wherever you go, you'll go to James the Just, for whom heaven and earth came into being. The disciples were evidently perceptive and knew that Jesus would not be with them for long. In order to prepare for his departure, they inquire as to who would lead them, who could steer them in the right direction, who could fill the shoes of Jesus himself. But of course, Jesus has an answer and tells them that James the Just will be the man they should seek out. James the Just was regarded as a brother of Jesus, and arguably a natural leader of the disciples after Jesus' disappearance. James, who was a leader of the Jerusalem church for over 15 years, was a revered man, and one who Jesus certainly felt was capable of leading in his stead. Saying 13, Thomas's confession. Jesus said to his disciples, if you were to compare me to someone, who would you say I'm like? Simon Peter said to him, you're just like an angel. Matthew said to him, you're like a wise philosopher. Thomas said to him, Teacher, I'm completely unable to say whom you're like. Jesus said, I'm not your teacher. Because you've drunk, you've become intoxicated by the bubbling spring I've measured out. He took him aside and told him 3 things. When Thomas returned to his companions, they asked, what did Jesus say to you? Thomas said to them, if I tell you one of these things he said to me, you'll pick up stones and cast them at me, and fire will come out of the stones and burn you up. It is unknown whether Jesus takes Thomas aside because he's upset with him or impressed with him. You'll notice he singles Thomas out because he referred to him as his teacher, and because he was intoxicated by the bubbling spring. Now, this isn't to say that Thomas was drunk or delirious, but it may have meant that he had absorbed so much of Jesus' words that he was now intoxicated by him. Again, whether Jesus is upset or impressed with Thomas here is up for some debate, but nonetheless, it does warrant him taking Thomas to one side, where he told him 3 things. Whether these things are conciliatory or reprimanding is not known. What we do know is that when Thomas returns to the other disciples, he tells them that he cannot reveal even one of the 3 words that Jesus had told him, for they would stone him after hearing them. Interestingly, stoning was a common practice used against blasphemers, and so it's possible that the words that were uttered to Thomas by Jesus were controversial. Some suggest that the words uttered were the true names of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Saying 14, public ministry. Jesus said to them, "If you fast, you'll bring guilt upon yourselves, and if you pray, you'll be condemned, and if you make donations, you'll harm your spirits. If they welcome you when you enter any land, and go around in the countryside, heal those who are sick among them, and eat whatever they give you, because it's not what goes into your mouth that will defile you. What comes out of your mouth is what will defile you." This saying goes hand in hand with saying 6, where Jesus tells his disciples not to bother praying and fasting if their heart isn't really in it. He reiterates here that by fasting without good intentions, you will only feel guilty, and that by praying without really believing, you will be condemned, and that if you make a donation for dishonourable reasons, your spirit will be harmed. He also provides his disciples with some lessons in being righteous, saying that when they're in the countryside and poorer areas, they should do whatever they can to heal the sick, and should not be picky in what they are given to eat, for the people of these areas have little to offer. Jesus poetically puts that it is not what goes into your mouth that will defile you, but instead what comes out of it. That is to say, eating a poor person's humble food will not sully or degrade you, but that insulting or inflammatory remarks toward the food will. Saying 15. Worship. Jesus said, "When you see the one that wasn't born of a woman, fall down on your face and worship that person. That's your father." It is difficult to get to the crux of this saying, given how vague it is. It is tempting to associate this to Shakespeare's Macbeth, with Macduff being not born of a woman, but cut from her stomach. But amongst some Gnostic groups, God was considered unbegotten, or that he was not born, since being born would imply that he was not infinite. This may be the basis of the saying, and a warning from Jesus, that if you saw a man who was not born of a woman, it was probably God himself. Another idea is that Jesus is equating God to himself here, as he is seen to do in the Gospel of John. Saying 16. Not peace, but war. Jesus said, "Maybe people think that I've come to cast peace on the world, and they don't know that I've come to cast divisions on the earth, fire, sword, and war. Where there are 5 in a house, there'll be 3 against 2, and 2 against 3, father against son, and son against father. They'll stand up and be one." Considering the many sayings that speak of peace and unity, this one is surprising, given that Jesus describes himself as a divider. However, it can be expected when you consider how divisive religious communities can be amongst themselves, let alone with secular communities. Jesus here recognizes that his ideas will separate the world, and that there will be many who side with him and many who do not. Saying 17. Divine gift. Jesus said, "I'll give you what no eye has ever seen, no ear has ever heard, no hand has ever touched, and no human mind has ever thought." This statement is pretty self-explanatory, where Jesus tells Thomas that he can give a person divine sight, divine hearing, divine feeling, and divine thought. He can share with a person a level of wisdom that cannot be attained anywhere else, and he can give someone a perception that they have never experienced before. Saying 18. Beginning and end. The disciples said to Jesus, "Tell us about our end. How will it come?" Jesus said, "Have you discovered the beginning so that you can look for the end? Because the end will be where the beginning is. Blessed is the one who will stand up in the beginning. They'll know the end and won't taste death." How the end will come is the million-dollar question for many religious communities, but here Jesus tells his disciples that to ponder on something like this is not necessary. In fact, he doesn't even dignify the question with a specific answer, choosing instead to tell his disciples that the end exists in the beginning, and that man cannot know the end without knowing the beginning. It is reminiscent of chapter 7 of the second book of Esdras, where we are told that the world shall be as it was at the first beginning, or maybe even reminiscent of chapter 22 of Revelation, where Jesus declares, "I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end." It could also be the case that Jesus relays here that there is no beginning or end, because time is infinite, like God, and so there cannot be a beginning or an end. Saying 19. 5 trees in paradise. Jesus said, "Blessed is the one who came into being before coming into being. If you become my disciples and listen to my message, these stones will become your servants, because there are 5 trees in paradise which don't change in summer or winter, and their leaves don't fall. Whoever knows them won't taste death." Such a concept is not a well-known one outside of Gnostic traditions. There is a concept here that one's life begins before they are actually born. That is to say, their spirit lives before being applied to a body during birth. There's also talk here of the 5 trees in paradise, literally 5 trees that are unaffected by the seasons. Whoever knows of these trees or comes to know of these trees will not taste death. Perhaps it is because in order to know these trees, one must be in paradise, and if one is in paradise, then they are free from death, and arguably the harshities of life too. Saying 20. The parable of the mustard seed. The disciples asked Jesus, "Tell us, what can the kingdom of heaven be compared to?" He said to them, "It can be compared to a mustard seed. Though it's the smallest of all the seeds, when it falls on tilled soil, it makes a plant so large that it shelters the birds of heaven." Here Jesus compares the kingdom of heaven to a mustard seed of all things. This may be in reference to the nature of seeds in general, in that once it is planted in fertile ground, it will likely grow into a plant. In this instance, a plant so large it can shelter the birds. Another idea is that the mustard seed is symbolic for the message being taught by Jesus, in that when it is planted into fertile ground, or planted into the minds of those who are receptive, it grows without restraint. Saying 21. The parables of the field, the bandits, and the reaper. Mary said to Jesus, "Whom are your disciples like?" He said, "They're like little children living in a field which isn't theirs. When the owners of the field come, they'll say, 'Give our field back to us.' They'll strip naked in front of them to let them have it, and give them their field. So I say that if the owner of the house realizes the bandits is coming, they'll watch out beforehand and won't let the bandit break into the house of their domain and steal their possessions. You then, watch out for the world, prepare to defend yourself so that the bandits don't attack you, because what you're expecting will come. May there be a wise person among you." When the fruit ripened, the reaper came quickly, sickle in hand, and harvested it. Anyone who has ears to hear should hear. Here we see Mary introduced, and we see her ask Jesus what his disciples are like. Jesus refers to his disciples as children, perhaps making note of their innocence, and that they live blissfully ignorant of the world, or in a field that does not belong to them. When the owner of the field, or God, returns to reclaim the field, Jesus notes that his disciples will be obedient and will strip their clothes, or perhaps strip themselves from their bodies in order to completely acquiesce to the Supreme Lord. However, the passage itself has many interpretations. It might simply be an allusion to the Christian baptism, which to the Gnostic community may have been a concern. Another idea is that the clothing which is stripped here by the disciples is a metaphor for the soul being stripped off the body in death, and heading away from the field and back to the heavenly realm. Saying 22, making the two into one. Jesus saw some little children nursing. He said to his disciples, "These nursing children can be compared to those who enter the kingdom." They said to him, "Then we'll enter the kingdom as little children." Jesus said to them, "When you make the two into one, and make the inner like the outer, and the outer like the inner, and the upper like the lower, and so make the male and the female a single one, so that the male won't be male, nor the female female. When you make eyes in the place of an eye, a hand in the place of a hand, a foot in the place of a foot, and an image in the place of an image, then you'll enter the kingdom." Here Jesus takes the opportunity to provide yet another metaphor to his disciples, showing them that those like nursing children will be the ones who enter the kingdom of heaven. When his disciples kind of miss the point and consider that they will literally enter the kingdom as children, Jesus provides another description ultimately detailing that only those who have become one will be eligible. First, Jesus points out that it is those who are like the nursing child who will be allowed to enter the kingdom. If we are the nursing child, then the mother in this example may be God, showcasing that we should have the same love for God that we might have for our mothers. Some might say that the love bond shared between mother and child is the same love bond God expects of his chosen. Therefore, the nursing child and mother analogy becomes appropriate. Secondly, the love that God expects of his people cannot be achieved so long as they are distracted by the material world. Until a person has stripped himself of the duality of the material and spiritual world and made them into one, or until a person has merged the soul and the body into one, only then will he be allowed into the kingdom. Jesus here also makes a point about making the male and female single, and so it might be said that it is only when a person abolishes the distinction of gender so that the two sexes become one can they hope to enter the heavenly kingdom. Saying 23, those who are chosen, 1. Jesus said, I'll choose you 1 out of 1,000 and 2 out of 10,000, and they'll stand as a single one. Simply put, in this saying, Jesus ultimately tells his disciples that very few people in the world will achieve the criteria specified in the last saying in order to enter heaven. Only 1 in 1,000 and 2 in 10,000 will be chosen. Saying 24, light. His disciples said, show us the place where you are, because we need to look for it. He said to them, anyone who has ears to hear should hear. Light exists within a person of light, and they light up the world. If they don't shine, there's darkness. Here Jesus tells his disciples that there are those who have a light within them. These people light up the world, and anyone with ears to hear this message should know of them. Because they light up the whole world, it does imply that this light can be shared, and a person can share their light with another, providing they are open to receiving it. Conversely, if a person doesn't shine, then they have within them a darkness, and it is indicative that these people are not righteous, and will probably not see the kingdom of heaven. Saying 25, love and protect. Jesus said, love your brother as your own soul. Protect them like the pupil of your eye. Jesus tells his disciples here that one should love their brother as they love their own soul, or put simply, love someone as you might love yourself. Treat your neighbour as you wish to be treated. As you might protect yourself and the pupil of your eye, you should also protect those around you. Such is a noble and virtuous way to live. Saying 26, speck and beam. Jesus said, you see the speck that's in your brother's eye, but you don't see the beam in your own eye. When you get the beam out of your own eye, then you'll be able to see clearly to get the speck out of your brother's eye. Jesus declares here that we are quick to see the imperfections in others, but we are not so quick to see the imperfections in ourselves. Once we are free of fault ourselves, which Jesus implies is not possible at this stage until we have become one, only then can we help to remove the speck or the imperfection from those around us. Saying 27, fasting and Sabbath. If you don't fast from the world, you won't find the kingdom. If you don't make the Sabbath into a Sabbath, you won't see the Father. Here Jesus recommends that one fast from the world, for if one becomes too involved in the world, they won't be able to find the heavenly kingdom. Furthermore, if they don't observe the Sabbath, they will not know God. Saying 28, the world is drunk. Jesus said, I stood in the middle of the world and appeared to them in the flesh. I found them all drunk. I didn't find any of them thirsty. My soul ached for the children of humanity, because they were blind in their hearts and couldn't see. They came into the world empty and plan on leaving the world empty. Meanwhile, they're drunk. When they shake off their wine, then they'll change. Here Jesus explains how disappointed he was with mankind's response when he first appeared with his mission. He tells us that mankind was caught in the illusion of the physical world, as if drunk with wine. Yet despite being drunk, none were thirsty. That is to say, none had a thirst for the spiritual reality. This bothered him greatly, For it appeared that man came into the world without knowledge of their true nature, and seemed just as content to leave the world with that same ignorance. It is only after they shake off their wine, or only after they become aware of the illusion of reality, will they seek their true reality in the heavenly kingdom. Saying 29, Spirit and Body. Jesus said if the flesh came into existence because of spirit, that's amazing. If spirit came into existence because of the body, that's really amazing. But I'm amazed at how such great wealth has been placed in this poverty. Here Jesus expresses his own amazement given the true nature of mankind. He deems here that the soul is enhanced by its attachment to the physical body, and vice versa. The symbiotic relationship of the soul and the body is truly a fantastic thing to Jesus. Yet he is also baffled that considering how glorious the dichotomy of soul and body is, many of these vessels live in poverty. Saying 30, Divine Presence. Jesus said, where there are 3 deities, they're divine. Where there are 2 or 1, I'm with them. This saying may simply be in reference to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. For where there are 2, the Father and the Holy Spirit, Jesus is also there as the Son. Jesus may also take the role as the Father, or the Holy Spirit in this example, and what he basically means to say is that without him, there is no divinity. Another idea, however, suggests that perhaps according to Gnostic traditions, Jesus didn't have a problem with polytheism, and put forward that when other deities were present, so was he. Saying 31, Prophet and Doctor. Jesus said no prophet is welcome in their own village, no doctor heals those who know them. Here Jesus applies some cryptic wisdom of life, telling us that no prophet is welcome in their own village, just as no doctor heals those who knows them. What he means by this is that people who knew the doctor before he was a doctor, perhaps even knowing him as a child, would only know him as this juvenile, boyish and youthful character. They would not know him as a medical practitioner, and would likely be dubious to allow him to examine them. The same goes for the prophet, for if everyone in the village knew the prophet as a child and had seen him behave mischievously or act immaturely, they might not take him seriously as carrying the word of God. Section 32, the parable of the fortified city. Jesus said, a city built and fortified on a high mountain can't fall, nor can it be hidden. The city here is not to be taken as a literal city, but instead as faith in God. The saying is meant to encourage Jesus' disciples and to keep them hopeful, for they are citizens of the kingdom of God, that which is built upon this high mountain. No earthquake can move it, no wind can batter it, no army can storm it, and no rain can flood it. With this belief, the disciples have all that they need. Section 33, the parable of the lamp. Jesus said, what you hear with one ear, listen to with both, then proclaim from your rooftops. No one lights a lamp and puts it under a basket, or in a hidden place. Rather, they put it on the strand, so that everyone who comes and goes can see its light. What Jesus tells his disciples here is that when they learn the truth, they should be sure to listen to it with both ears, so that they understand it. Once they comprehend what they have been told, they should proclaim it from the rooftops. They should share their knowledge with all who will listen, and like a lamp, they should display it proudly, so that it will guide the way of others. He notes here that no one lights a lamp and hides it, and by that same logic, no one should learn the truth and hide it. Saying 34, the parable of those who can't see. Jesus said if someone who's blind leads someone else who's blind, both of them fall into a pit. Yet another saying which is fairly easy to understand. Jesus explains to his disciples that a blind man can't lead a blind man anywhere, and that if he did, both would end up in a perilous situation. In the same vein, a man who does not understand the truth of God's words cannot then explain that truth to someone else. Section 35, the parable of the binding strong. Jesus said no one can break into the house of the strong and take it by force without tying the hands of the strong. Then they can loot the house. What Jesus attempts to tell his disciples here is that if their faith is strong enough, no one can take it from them. If they believe in God as much as they claim to, then their ideals will be unshakable. Faith cannot be reckoned with unless a person allows their faith to be questioned. Only then can their faith be stolen. Saying 36. Anxiety. Jesus said, "Don't be anxious from the morning to evening, or from evening to morning, about what you'll wear." Yet another simple saying. Jesus tells his disciples not to be anxious over their outward appearance, for this is a condition of vanity and pride, which will separate them from the truth. Saying 37. Seeing Jesus. His disciples said, "When will you appear to us? When will we see you?" Jesus said, "When you strip naked without being ashamed, and throw your clothes on the ground and stomp on them, as little children would. Then you'll see the Son of the Living One, and won't be afraid." Again, the disciples express eagerness and want to know when they will see him, and Jesus replies that it is only when they are unashamed of their nakedness and stomp on their clothes, as children would, will they truly see him. Here, Jesus may not be talking literally about clothes, but instead the shedding of one's beliefs or preconceptions of God and divinity. What he tells his disciples is that once they have become like children, knowing nothing of shame, they will see him. Another idea is that when his disciples shed their bodies, as they transition into the afterlife, then they will see him. Once more, the recurring notion that the righteous man should be like a child in terms of innocence and morality is made to seem imperative. Saying 38. Finding Jesus. Jesus said, "Often you've wanted to hear this message that I'm telling you, and you don't have anyone else from whom to hear it. There will be days when you'll look for me, but you won't be able to find me." This saying might be seen as a warning, for Jesus is telling his disciples that he won't always be with them. At this moment, it is easy for them to find comfort in Jesus' words, because he is there to tell them, and because he is there, it is easy to believe in the word of God. But when he is absent, perhaps foreshadowing his death, there will be days where he will not be found, and so the disciples, amongst everyone else, will have to work extra hard in order to maintain their faith. Saying 39. The keys of knowledge. Jesus said, "The Pharisees and the scholars have taken the keys of knowledge and hidden them. They haven't entered, and haven't let others enter who wanted to. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves." Here Jesus explains to his disciples that access to spiritual understanding has been seized and blocked by the authorities and local governments, and that these people of social power do not in fact understand that which they possess. Worse yet, they have also made this knowledge forbidden to the common man and prevented him from attaining spiritual reality. In response to this, Jesus advises to keep a low profile and to appear as innocent as doves in order to not attract the attention of the authorities, but also to be as wise as serpents so as to outmaneuver the authorities if need be in the quest for spiritual reality. Saying 40. A grapevine. Jesus said, "A grapevine has been planted outside of the Father. Since it's malnourished, it'll be pulled up by its root and destroyed." Here Jesus seeks to explain that even if a grapevine is planted outside of God, then it will be malnourished, and by the end of days, it will be pulled up by its root and destroyed. This is the same for a human being who lives his life without the consideration of God. He too will be malnourished, at least spiritually, and at the end of days will suffer the same fate as the grapevine. Saying 41. More and less. Jesus said, "Whoever has something in hand will be given more, but whoever doesn't have anything will lose even what little they do have." Here Jesus tells his disciples about gratitude, showing them that those who are grateful will always live in abundance, but those who believe they have nothing will experience true loss when what little they thought they had is also taken away from them. Saying 42. Passing by. Jesus said, "Become passers-by." It's possible here that Jesus meant that a person should keep out of trouble and to avoid danger where possible, thus passing by. Yet when we consider the importance of the spiritual in Gnostic beliefs, it's possible that Jesus is telling his disciples that they should not be too involved in the physical world, because they are merely passing by on their journey to the spiritual. By being a passerby, Jesus advises his disciples to observe and gather information, to learn all that one can before moving on to a new area. In essence, one should not build their spiritual home in the physical world, but be always ready to move on. Saying 43, the tree and the fruit. His disciples said to him, "Who are you to say these things to us? You don't realize who I am from what I say to you, but you've become like those Judeans, who either love the tree but hate its fruit, or love the fruit but hate the tree." Jesus' disciples appear to actually express doubt here, as they question how Jesus could possibly know all of these things. But Jesus does not respond bitterly, and simply tells them that they are like Judeans, who either love the tree but hate its fruit, or love the fruit but hate the tree. In essence, what he means here is that by nature, people will either love Jesus but find his message inconvenient, or they will love the message but hate Jesus. Saying 44, blasphemy. Jesus said, "Whoever blasphemes the Father will be forgiven, and whoever blasphemes the Son will be forgiven. But whoever blasphemes the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven, neither on earth nor in heaven." It is believed that the Holy Spirit is with believers at all times, and that it is the most reliable witness that records all that happens. To call the Spirit a liar or to blaspheme against it appears to be the worst possible insult a person can inflict. Jesus even tells his disciples that they are free to disagree with him, and even God himself, but the Holy Spirit was off limits. Saying 45, good and evil. Jesus said, "Grapes aren't harvested from thorns, nor are figs gathered from thistles, because they don't produce fruit. A person who's good brings good things out of their treasure, and a person who's evil brings evil things out of their evil treasure. They say evil things because their heart is full of evil." What Jesus is essentially telling his disciples here is that they should be more careful as to what they store in their hearts. If they store good things, then they are less likely to harbour evil in them. If they store bad things, then they are less likely to maintain goodness in them. As grapes are not harvested from thorns, and figs are not gathered from thistles, happiness cannot be exhibited by one with an evil heart, much as sadness cannot be exhibited by one with a happy heart. Saying 46, greater than John the Baptizer. Jesus said, "From Adam to John the Baptizer, no one's been born who's so much greater than John the Baptizer that they shouldn't avert their eyes. But I say that whoever among you will become a little child will know the kingdom and become greater than John." Once more, Jesus encourages his disciples to be like infants, uncorrupted by influence. When one casts off the complexities of the world and acts with the moral simplicity of a child, then they can know salvation, and then they can know the divine kingdom, as well as becoming greater than John. Saying 47, the parables of divided loyalties, new wine in old wineskins, and new patch on old cloth. Jesus says it's not possible for anyone to mount 2 horses or stretch 2 bows, and it's not possible for a servant to follow 2 leaders, because they'll respect one and despise the other. No one drinks old wine and immediately wants to drink new wine, and new wine isn't put in old wineskins because they'd burst. Nor is old wine put in new wineskins because it would spoil. A new patch of cloth isn't sewn onto an old coat because it would tear again. Jesus tells his disciples in this saying that one cannot gain new knowledge if they are unwilling to change their thinking. If one comes across a new concept or idea on how to live life, the old concept that one already adheres to will resist. Ultimately, our habits will most likely dictate who we are, and if we have spent years believing one thing, we are unlikely to change our opinion, unless cornered with undisputable proof. Depending on the subject, we may concede to the new idea with either subtle begrudging or outright resentment, but in any case, both ideas cannot coincide. As Jesus states here, it's not possible to follow two leaders, because one will end up respecting one leader and despising the other. Put simply, one can either choose to grow with new knowledge or remain stagnant with old knowledge. Going with the traditional Gnostic idea, Jesus' words here are in reference to the truth of the divine life and the illusion of the physical life. With this idea, a man cannot live a life of greedy material enjoyment whilst also achieving spiritual enlightenment and the kingdom of heaven. He must choose one. Saying 48. Unity 1. Jesus said, if two make peace with each other in a single house, they'll say to the mountain, "Go away," and it will. This saying could possibly be in reference to married life, in that if a husband and wife are in complete cohesion, then they can overcome any of life's obstacles. If the masculine and the feminine become one, mountains can be moved. Saying 49. Those who are chosen 2. Jesus said, blessed are those who are one, those who are chosen, because you'll find the kingdom. You've come from there and will return there. A Gnostic idea can be derived from Jesus' saying here, in that human beings, that is to say, their spirits, came from another realm, and that at the time of their physical death, their spirit will return there. Jesus simply tells his disciples here that those who achieve that singular form, that oneness with the spirit, will be chosen. Saying 50. Our origin and identity. Jesus said, if they ask you, where do you come from? Tell them, we've come from the light, the place where light came into being by itself, established itself, and appeared in their image. If they ask you, is it you? Then say, we are its children, and we're chosen by our living Father. If they ask you, what's the sign of your Father in you? Then say, it's movement and rest. What Jesus expresses to his disciples here is that the righteous should aim to achieve the aforementioned oneness, and that they should be proud that they have come from the place of light, this heavenly realm of spirits. The light is oneself. It connects itself to the heavenly realm. The movement and rest that Jesus speaks of here in reference to the sign of the Father in us could be linked to the breath that moves in all of us, breath being the indicator of one being alive. Saying 51, the New World. His disciples said to him, when will the dead have rest, and when will the new world come? He said to them, what you're looking for has already come, but you don't know it. Here, the disciples want to know when the new world will arrive, and essentially, when all the things that Jesus has predicted will come to pass. What Jesus replies with is basically another warning that the knowledge we seek is already inside of us, but we are not at the level that is necessary to interpret this knowledge. Another way to look at Jesus' reply is that we are so unaware of the ultimate spiritual plan and all that happens around us that we are unable to realize that it's already transpiring. Saying 52, 24 prophets. His disciples said to him, 24 prophets have spoken in Israel, and they all speak of you. He said to them, you've ignored the living one right in front of you, and you've talked about those who are dead. Here Jesus tells his disciples not to be concerned with what others have said, even the 24 prophets of Israel. Why should they even mention these other prophets when Jesus himself, the living one, is standing right before them? You might say that Jesus takes some affront to this statement, caring not for the other prophets, nor whether they acknowledge him or not. Saying 53, true circumcision. His disciples said to him, is circumcision useful or not? He said to them, if it were useful, parents would have children who were born circumcised. But the true circumcision in the spirit has become profitable in every way. Here, Jesus doesn't support the physical circumcision made popular in the Old Testament by Abraham. Indeed, by the New Testament, circumcision of the spirit became a more popular tradition, whereby the covenant with God could be achieved through baptism instead. Jesus doesn't condemn physical circumcision here, He simply disregards it as being useful or being necessary when worshipping God. Saying 54. Those who are poor. Jesus said, "Blessed are those who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven." What Jesus means here is that those who are poor will not be distracted with the finer things of life. They are more likely to worship and pray to God because of their dire situation, and by turning their life over to God with sheer authenticity, they will be allowed into the eternal kingdom in return. The rich, however, may have no need of God, considering that their riches will see them live a comfortable earthly life. At the end of their mortal life, though, they will be denied the eternal kingdom for having shunned God and having appreciated their riches more. Saying 55. Discipleship 1. Jesus said, "Whoever doesn't hate their father and mother can't become my disciple, and whoever doesn't hate their brothers and sisters and take up their cross like I do isn't worthy of me." Here it is possible that Jesus encourages people to be ready to reject or sacrifice that which we love, our family, in order to be truly free. By rejecting what we love the most, you might say it also allows for God's love to fill that very space. Yet going by a more Gnostic idea, it might be the freeing of one's soul from the bonds of earthly illusion. By sacrificing the self for the family, an endless cycle of obligation is created. But by sacrificing the family for the self, the cycle is broken, which allows for transcendency. Previous sayings have hinted at having no attachment to the physical world, and this may be another article of Gnostic belief shining through in the Gospel. Saying 56. The world is a corpse. Jesus said, "Whoever has known the world has found a corpse. Whoever has found a corpse, of them the world isn't worthy." It's hard to unpick what Jesus really means here, but some ideas propose that Jesus is referring to the state of the world being in constant decay. The world is thus like a corpse. It is rotting day by day, especially if you consider the levels of pollution that would come to fruition some thousands of years later. Another idea follows the more Gnostic concept that the physical world is not the final destination. It is a place that, like our physical body, is constantly decomposing. Therefore, we should not aspire to be inside the world, this corpse, but instead gain access to the spiritual world after we leave our bodies behind. Saying 57. The parable of weeds. Jesus said, "My Father's kingdom can be compared to someone who had good seed. Their enemy came by night and sowed weeds among the good seed. The person didn't let anyone pull out the weeds. So that you don't pull out the wheat along the weeds, they said to them, on the day of the harvest, the weeds will be obvious. Then they'll be pulled out and burned." Yet another allegory, Jesus advises his disciples not to concern themselves with their enemies too much. In this, bad people are inevitable. They are the weeds that grow amongst the seeds. But if you live your life righteously, in the end, it will be obvious who is good and who is wicked, and the wicked will get what they deserve. Like the weeds that have taken root around the harvest, they will be pulled out and burned. Saying 58. Finding life. Jesus said, "Blessed is the person who's gone to a lot of trouble. They found life." Here Jesus tells his disciples that it is he who goes through hardships and turmoil is blessed, because it is he who is alive. Many times we take for granted how fortunate we are, and though we may be going through hardships, at least we are still alive. The saying might also be a way in which Jesus tells his disciples to appreciate what they have, for there could be someone in a much worse position than them, with greater hardships to bear. Saying 59. The living one. Jesus said, "Look for the living one while you're still alive. If you die and then try to look for him, you won't be able to." Yet another warning from Jesus. He tells his disciples that if they are still alive, then the living one, who we know by now is himself, will be available. But should someone die and then try to look for him, they will not be able to. In essence, we are told that one must find Jesus while they are living, because to do so in the afterlife is too late. Once someone realizes the gravity of their death, they are more likely to turn to Jesus out of fear, regret, or desperation. It would appear that Jesus wants to inspire people to worship him whilst they are living, and it is only those who will be allowed to live in the spiritual world, in the kingdom of heaven. Saying 60. Don't become a corpse. They saw a Samaritan carrying a lamb to Judea. He said to his disciples, "What do you think he's going to do with that lamb?" They said to him, "He's going to kill it and eat it." He said to them, "Whilst it's living, he won't eat it, but only after he kills it and it becomes a corpse." They said, "He can't do it any other way." He said to them, "You too look for a resting place, so that you won't become a corpse and be eaten." This might be a nod to the 7th saying, where Jesus tells his disciples that it is misfortune for a man to be eaten by an animal, for then that man becomes a part of the animal. Here he wants his disciples to essentially find a good place to die, a place that's safe and a place that one can transition into the afterlife peacefully from. If a man dies in the wild, for example, then his body is up for grabs from roaming animals. A part of him is then lost to that animal, and so he can never quite be whole again. In essence, Jesus encourages a peaceful life, where one may pass over quietly. Saying 61. Jesus and Salome. Jesus said, "Two will rest on a couch, one will die, the other will live." Salome said, "Who are you, sir, to climb onto my couch and eat off my table, as if you're from somewhere?" Jesus said to her, "I'm the one who exists in equality. Some of what belongs to my Father was given to me. I'm your disciple," she says. "So I'm telling you, if someone is equal, they'll be full of light, but if they're divided, they'll be full of darkness." Here we see that Salome questions Jesus as to why he believes he can sit on her couch and eat from her table. Yet her disdain is not long-lived, for after Jesus' explanation that he is the one who exists in equality, she is quick to concede that she is his disciple. What Jesus tells her here is that if someone is balanced, according to Gnostic teachings, then they will be full of light and eligible to reach the heavenly kingdom. But if they are divided, then they will be full of darkness and cast away from the heavenly kingdom in the final times. Saying 62. Mysteries. Jesus said, "I tell my mysteries to those who are worthy of my mysteries. Don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing." Jesus tells his disciples that his many mysteries will only be told to those who are worthy of hearing them. He instructs his disciples not to let their left hands know what their right hands are doing, which has many interpretations. One idea is that one shouldn't be so focused on the physical body, as is a common theme in Gnostic belief. Another idea that stems from ancient Hebrew communities is that most people were right-handed, and so most people completed tasks with their right hands. By not allowing the left hand to know what the right hand is doing, there can be no distraction. The left hand is thus only secondary to the right hand. The right hand should always be in control and guide a person to their purpose. Saying 63. The parable of the rich fool. Jesus said there was a rich man who had much money. He said, "I'll use my money to sow, reap, plant, and fill my barns with fruit, so that I won't need anything." That's what he was thinking to himself, but he died that very night. Anyone who has ears to hear should hear. Here Jesus tells his disciples that money is really nothing at all. It doesn't matter how rich a person is, because even with such a fortune, they can't buy their way out of death. We can be so fixated on the monetary value of things and increasing our wealth that we forget how sacred life actually is. The rich man had big plans with all of his money, but not even he could escape his fate. Jesus basically encourages his disciples here not to get too attached to money. Saying 64. The parable of the dinner party. Jesus said someone was planning on having guests. When dinner was ready, they sent their servant to call the visitors. The servant went to the first and said, "My master invites you." They said, "Some merchants owe me money. They're coming tonight. I need to go and give them instructions. Excuse me from the dinner." The servant went to another one and said, "My master invites you." They said, "I've just bought a house and am needed for the day. I won't have time." The servant went to another one and said, "My master invites you." They said, "My friend is getting married, and I'm going to make dinner. I can't come. Excuse me from the dinner." The servant went to another one and said, "My master invites you." They said, "I've just bought a farm, and I'm going to collect the rent. I can't come. Excuse me." The servant went back and told the master, "The ones you've invited to the dinner have excused themselves." The master said to their servant, "Go out to the roads and bring whomever you find, so that they can have dinner. Buyers and merchants won't enter the places of my Father." With this story, we see that the master is a humble and considerate fellow. Despite being unanimously rejected by those he had invited to his dinner party, he doesn't call the whole thing off, like most of us would. He instead tells his servant to go out to the streets and find anyone who is hungry and willing to come instead. The master extends his hospitality to even strangers, and though this wasn't his first choice, he makes the best of a bad situation. Furthermore, Jesus also tells his disciples that merchants and buyers won't even enter the heavenly kingdom when they die, because as we see in this example, they're far too focused on their own pursuits and ambitions to consider anyone else. Saying 65, the parable of the sharecroppers. He said a creditor owned a vineyard. He leased it out to some sharecroppers to work it so he could collect its fruit. He sent his servant so that the sharecroppers could give him the fruit of the vineyard. They seized his servant, beat him, and nearly killed him. The servant went back and told his master. His master said, maybe he just didn't know them. He sent another servant, but the tenants beat that one too. Then the master sent his son, thinking, maybe they'll show some respect to my son. Because they knew that he was the heir of the vineyard, the sharecroppers seized him and killed him. Anyone who has ears to hear should hear. Here Jesus tells his disciples not to be so trusting of others, especially when it comes to business. The creditor wasted 3 lives including his own son, because he was too trusting of the sharecroppers who took advantage of him. Jesus also tells his disciples that when it comes to business, second and third chances should not be given so easily, as with the sharecroppers, they continue to spurn him without hesitation. Furthermore, the creditor's greed may also be a point worth mentioning, because had he not sent another servant and his own son to collect the fruit that was owed to him, they wouldn't have been beaten and may have still lived. The creditor sends 3 men to meet with misfortune, and in the end, he still doesn't get his fruit. Saying 66, the rejected cornerstone. Jesus said, "Show me the stone builders rejected. That's the cornerstone." Here Jesus tells his disciples that there is value in everything. The builders reject a certain stone, but Jesus is able to frame the rejected stone as a cornerstone. In effect, you may consider this as one man's trash is another man's treasure, or conversely, you might say that because it is Jesus, he's able to make something that is deemed worthless and turn it into something imperative. Saying 67, knowing isn't everything. Jesus said, whoever knows everything, but is personally lacking, lacks everything. Here Jesus tells his disciples that if someone, usually a know-it-all, appears to know everything, but expresses no empathy, loyalty, happiness, goodness, or any kind of social adequacy, then they actually don't know anything at all. He describes them as lacking everything. Knowledge is of course great, but if you have no personality or moral traits, then you really have no value at all. Saying 68, persecution. Jesus said, "Blessed are you when you are hated and persecuted, and no place will be found where you've been persecuted." Here Jesus tells his disciples that when you are hated and persecuted, you are blessed, for there may actually be a case for your cause. Much as Jesus was hated and persecuted in his time, the same might be true of anyone. Often if we have a good idea, or an avenue we wish to explore, we can be met with those who are naysayers, or for lack of a better term, haters. Jesus explains that whilst it might not feel good to receive these attacks, it might actually be a good thing. It's evidence, of course depending on the cause, that you're doing the right thing. In essence, change cannot happen without resistance. Saying 69, those who are persecuted. Jesus said, "Blessed are those who have been persecuted in their own hearts. They've truly known the Father." Blessed are those who are hungry, so that their stomachs may be filled. Here Jesus echoes the points made in saying 58, in that a person who is going through hardships or suffering may be better off in the long run. It is these people who will earnestly pray to God for help, and it is these people who are more likely to find God and thus be saved. Saying 70, salvation is within. Jesus said, if you give birth to what's within you, what you have within you will save you. If you don't have that within you, what you don't have within you will kill you. What Jesus tells his disciples here is that all we need is what we have inside of us. Our inner strength is enough to carry us through our suffering and our hardships if we tune into it, and if we are resilient enough to utilize it. On the other hand, if we are not, we might succumb to more pain, and perhaps even death. Another idea here is that what's within us is God himself, and those who access him are able to save themselves. Those who are not able to, or who choose not to, are in a sense killing themselves. Saying 71, destroying the temple. Jesus said, I'll destroy this house, and no one will be able to build it. Here Jesus may be telling his disciples that he can destroy the house, that is, the temple of God. And though that might seem counterproductive to his intentions, it may simply mean that he has the power to take everything away. Perhaps it might be a warning to his disciples, akin to the adage, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Jesus also claims here that once he has taken something away, no one, no matter how hard they try, will be able to replace it. Saying 72, not a divider. Someone said to him, tell my brothers to divide our inheritance with me. He said to him, who made me a divider? He turned to his disciples and said to them, am I really a divider? This can be looked at in two ways. Either Jesus is amused that someone has asked him for a favour, especially a favour that is quite trivial in his eyes, or he is amused at the paradox that someone wants him to divide something. Jesus, who you might say was ultimately trying to unite everything, may have found the irony in being asked to be the facilitator of division in this example. He even turns to his disciples and seems to rhetorically ask them, really? After everything I've said, I'm being asked to divide something? Saying 73, workers of the harvest. Jesus said the harvest really is plentiful, but the workers are few. So pray that the Lord will send workers to the harvest. Here Jesus warns his followers about wasting food. It would appear here that in this particular season there is much to go around. However, there aren't enough mouths to consume the harvest, and so Jesus encourages prayer that more people will come so that nothing is wasted. Saying 74, the empty well. He said, Lord, many are gathered around the well, but there's nothing to drink. Here Jesus seems to associate the water in the well with the truth, and that though there are many gathered around the well, none are able to drink from it. It could be a metaphor that no one is ready for the truth. No one can get the water because they cannot see it, or do not believe it to be there. Saying 75, the bridal chamber. Jesus said, many are waiting at the door, but those who are won will enter the bridal chamber. Here Jesus refers back to the Gnostic idea that man and woman should become one, and that there should not be such a distinction between gender, for there is not such a thing in the spiritual world. Many, he tells his disciples, think they are ready to be married, but it is only those who are truly in sync with each other who are truly ready. Saying 76, the parable of the pearl. Jesus said the Father's kingdom can be compared to a merchant with merchandise who found a pearl. The merchant was wise. They sold their merchandise and brought that single pearl for themselves. You too, look for the treasure that doesn't perish, but endures, where no moths come to eat and no worms destroy. Here Jesus tells his disciples that if they must spend money, they should spend it on things that are important, things that will sustain a man or can be later traded for more resources in the future, like the pearl. Jesus praises the merchant, which he doesn't usually do in this gospel, and considers him wise for selling all of his wares in favour of this one pearl. Essentially, you might say that Jesus encourages his followers to be wise with their money, to make good investments, and not to waste it on things that can easily perish. Saying 77, Jesus is the all. Jesus said, I'm the light that's all over. I am the all. The all has come from me and unfolds towards me. Split a log. I am there. Lift the stone, and you'll find me there. As is commonplace in the traditional Bible, Jesus tells his disciples that he can be found anywhere in the world. It matters not how unlikely a place is. Jesus can be found there. Saying 78, into the desert. Jesus said, what did you go out into the desert to see? A reed shaken by the wind? A person wearing fancy clothes, like your rulers and powerful people? They wear fancy clothes, but can't know the truth. Here Jesus appears to denounce the rulers and influential people of the lands. It's as if he tells his followers that just because they are in positions of power, it does not mean they know the truth. This is especially true if their behaviours are not in line with the truth. In Gnostic ideas seen so far, for example, wearing fancy clothes, or at the very least, valuing fancy clothes as a necessary possession, is not congruent with the beliefs presented here. So if there is a leader who values fancy clothes, or values the superficial, despite their position of power, they are still ignorant in the grand scheme. Saying 79, listening to the message. A woman in the crowd said to him, Blessed is the womb that bore you, and the breasts that nourished you. He said to her, Blessed are those who have listened to the message of the Father and kept it, because there will be days when you'll say, Blessed is the womb that didn't conceive, and the breasts that haven't given milk. Here it would seem that Jesus advises a woman in the crowd that she should not put her faith in other humans and their abilities, but instead put her faith in God. This is because humans are fallible and can let each other down. He advises the woman here not to bless the womb, because if a woman is infertile, then evidently her womb in the endeavour of producing children is not blessed. Essentially, Jesus cautions of placing too much trust in one another and what we can do for each other. Saying 80, the world is a body. Jesus said, Whoever has known the world has found the body, but whoever has found the body, of them the world isn't worthy. Here it might be said that Jesus commends the person who knows themselves. It's easy for us to know the world, as he implies here, for the world is available to everyone to experience. But to know oneself is a most tricky affair that takes a lot of practice and dedication, a feat that arguably most people will never completely achieve. Therefore, if someone does know themselves wholly, then such a person will know everything. Remember, in saying 51, Jesus tells his disciples that true knowledge is already inside of us. It's just a matter of accessing it. Saying 81, riches and renunciation, 1. Jesus said, Whoever has become rich should become a ruler, and whoever has power should renounce it. Jesus tells his disciples here that it is he who has become rich, or he who has worked hard and struggled to achieve riches, should be rulers. It's likely the case that Jesus is making the point that if someone has endured struggle and overcome it, then they are the best person to lead others who struggle to new heights. Those who have had power given to them should renounce their power because they have not struggled to achieve it, and thus cannot possibly know what it's like to be in a less fortunate position. You might say that in order to truly know power, one must be powerless first to appreciate it. Saying 82, Jesus and fire, 2. Jesus said, Whoever is near me is near the fire, and whoever is far from me is far from the kingdom. What Jesus may mean here is that those closest to him will know warmth and comfort, much as fire might be a comfort. Conversely, those who are far away from him are also far from reaching the divine kingdom in the afterlife. It is therefore only by being close to Jesus that one may achieve an ideal spiritual afterlife. Saying 83, light and images. Jesus said images are revealed to people, but the light within them is hidden in the image of the Father's light. He'll be revealed, but his image will be hidden by his light. The idea that Jesus tackles here is that we believe we know what we see, but in actuality, the true meaning behind what we look at is lost to us. For example, we may believe we know the meaning of a particular story, but because we are influenced by our own life experiences, the true meaning of the story, or the light within the story, is lost to us. The same might be said of God, as Jesus tells us he'll be revealed, but his image will be hidden by his light. In other words, we might be able to understand God's words and his meanings, but we'll never actually be able to conceive what he looks like. Saying 84, our previous images. Jesus said, when you see your likeness, you rejoice. But when you see your images that came into being before you did, which don't die and aren't revealed, how much you'll have to bear. It's possible here that Jesus is speaking of the end Gnostic goal, that is, to be whole. When one doesn't become whole, they will rejoice for having achieved that which is so sacred. But when one is whole, they will also have trouble reconciling this wholeness, because all the individual parts of oneself are still active. In fact, it's possible that these individual parts of oneself will rebel against the complete self, and so it will be a difficult state to maintain. Saying 85, Adam wasn't worthy. Jesus said Adam came into being from great power and great wealth, but he didn't become worthy of you. If he had been worthy, he wouldn't have tasted death. Here Jesus condemns Adam for having betrayed God's trust. You might even say he promotes the current mankind above him because he deems him as being unworthy. Ultimately, Jesus tells his disciples that Adam was no good, and if he was, he wouldn't have fallen from his place in the Garden of Eden. He wouldn't have known death. Saying 86, foxes and birds. Jesus said the foxes have dens and the birds have nests, but the Son of Humanity has nowhere to lay his head and rest. Jesus gives his disciples an interesting observation, that because we have civilization, we do not cultivate our own homes as the animals do. In a sense, Jesus is pointing out that we are not free, at least not as free as the animals, for the foxes can set up their dens, and the birds can set up their nests anywhere. We, on the other hand, require planning permission, we require money, we require citizenship, and a whole load of legal red tape that must be crossed first. In some ways, you might say that Jesus implies that we have gone against the natural order of things. Saying 87, body and soul. Jesus said, how miserable is the body that depends on a body, and how miserable is the soul that depends on both. Yet another difficult saying to interpret, it's possible that Jesus is again acknowledging the Gnostic tradition that the body and soul need to be one. If one perceives that their body is who they are, then they likely believe that when their body dies, they will die. This is miserable, according to Jesus. If one perceives that the body and the soul are separate, then it's likely that one believes that when the body dies, the soul lives on. Whilst this is hopeful, Jesus conveys that the two are intertwined, and perhaps different manifestations of a higher power. Saying 88, angels and prophets. Jesus said, the angels and the prophets will come to you and give you what belongs to you. You'll give them what you have and ask yourselves, when will they come and take what is theirs? Here Jesus warns his disciples that nothing in this world is free. Even though prophets and angels are deemed here to be generous and will part with knowledge, wisdom and gifts, even they may expect something in return. There's also a Gnostic idea hidden in this saying, in that we don't actually own anything, and that what is given by the divine can just as easily be taken away again. With this, Jesus highlights that one should be prepared to lose what has been given to them. Saying 89, inside and outside. Jesus said, why do you wash the outside of the cup? Don't you know that whoever created the inside created the outside too? This could be seen as another metaphor. The cup is not necessarily what is in question here, but perhaps us. We are the cup, and when we wash, we only cleanse our outsides. Naturally, it's impossible to physically cleanse our insides, but what Jesus means is that we are so eager to be clean on the outside, yet less enthusiastic about being clean on the inside. We can harbour dark thoughts, ill feelings, and terrible habits, but we are much less bothered by this than we are by how we look or smell. Ultimately, Jesus tells his disciples that if they appear healthy on the outside, they should make efforts to be healthy on the inside too. Saying 90, Jesus' yoke is easy. Jesus said, "Come to me, because my yoke is easy and my requirements are light. You'll be refreshed." Here Jesus tells all that they should not feel intimidated by him, despite everything he has spoken of so far, and despite how daunting it might all sound. To be in his presence is easy, and afterwards you'll feel better for it. Saying 91, reading the signs. They said to him, "Tell us who you are, so that we may trust you." He said to them, "You read the face of the sky and the earth, but you don't know the one right in front of you, and you don't know how to read the present moment." It's possible that by this point, Jesus had assembled a large audience, and that many strangers were asking him why they should trust him. He was, after all, someone they didn't know. But Jesus replies that man blindly trusts the sun to rise every morning. He blindly trusts the sky to be there when he wakes, and blindly trusts the earth to be there to walk on. If mankind can trust these elements, then they should have had no issue trusting Jesus. Saying 92, look and find. Jesus said, "Look and you'll find. I didn't answer your questions before. Now I want to give you answers, but you aren't looking for them." Jesus is likely addressing the crowd again here, but he doesn't just want to give them the answers to the questions they seek. He wants them to look for them, for it is possible that there is merit in the actual search of the truth. One might not be able to truly appreciate the wisdom and knowledge that Jesus offers if it is simply handed to them. He also believes that those claiming to want answers don't really want them that badly. They aren't looking for them, Jesus remarks, and so it's possible he did not deem them as worthy yet. Saying 93, don't throw pearls to pigs. Don't give what's holy to the dogs, or else it might be thrown on the manure pile. Don't throw pearls to pigs, or else they might. The text is broken at the end of this saying, and so we cannot know what Jesus meant to say. However, given the previous statement that dogs will throw that which is holy to the manure, it's likely that the pigs would do the same to the pearls. Ultimately, what Jesus is trying to say here is not to reward those who don't deserve it, much as he demonstrates in saying 92. Poor behaviour should not be encouraged with rewards, and furthermore, it's likely those who are considered dogs or pigs who will not truly appreciate your efforts anyway. Saying 94, knock and it will be opened. Jesus said, whoever looks will find, and whoever knocks, it will be opened for them. Here Jesus tells his disciples that anyone can find him or God if they choose to. All they have to do is reach out and they will be answered. Saying 95, giving money. Jesus said if you have money, don't lend it at interest. Instead, give it to someone whom you won't get it back. Jesus tells his disciples a rather unorthodox lesson, and one that might contradict saying 76, where he tells people to be careful with money. Here he suggests that if we lend someone money, likely someone who is in dire need of it, we should not expect it back, much less should we charge that person interest, because it was our decision to give it to them. What Jesus may be saying is that we shouldn't be mad at someone if they don't pay us back, but that we should be happy that we were able to help them. Saying 96, the parable of the yeast. Jesus said the Father's kingdom can be compared to a woman who took a little yeast and hid it in flour. She made it into large loaves of bread. Anyone who has ears to hear should hear. In this saying, it's possible that Jesus is referring to one's growth only taking a small amount. As the woman who put a little yeast into flour to make large loaves of bread, so too can we put little effort into making ourselves great, and perhaps eligible for the divine kingdom. Saying 97, the parable of the jar of flour. Jesus said the Father's kingdom can be compared to a woman carrying a jar of flour. While she was walking down a long road, the jar's handle broke, and the flour spilled out behind her on the road. She didn't know it and didn't realise there was a problem until she got home, put down the jar, and found it empty. It's possible here that Jesus is comparing the jar of flour to the kingdom of heaven, and that like the woman, we have it with us. However, it is only at the end of our journey do we realise it, and if we have sinned, it is only at the end do we realise what we have given up. Saying 98, the parable of the assassin. Jesus said the Father's kingdom can be compared to a man who wanted to kill someone powerful. He drew his sword in his house and drove it into the wall to figure out whether his hand was strong enough. Like the previous saying, Jesus tells us that we are like the assassin. We wonder if we are able to ascend into the spiritual kingdom and can even ponder on our strength. Indeed, we do possess strength, but there is such a thing as too much strength, or perhaps not knowing one's strength. There's also a case here that once the assassin learned he was strong enough after striking the wall, he used this advantage to kill the powerful one. In some ways, it might be said here that Jesus is warning us of our own strength, and that what we desire, we already have. Saying 99, Jesus' true family. The disciple said to him, "Your brothers and mother are standing outside." He said to them, "The people here who do the will of my Father are my brothers and mother. They're the ones who will enter my Father's kingdom." Jesus tells his disciples here that though we are born to our parents and our siblings, and though we are related in blood, they may not necessarily be our true family. As you can see, Jesus decrees that the people here listening to him are his family, and it is they who will go with him into his Father's kingdom. In this sense, blood isn't always thicker than water, and we may find ourselves more in tune with those who are not our blood relatives. Saying 100, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. They showed Jesus a gold coin and said to him, "Those who belong to Caesar demand tribute from us." He said to them, "Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, give to God what belongs to God, and give to me what belongs to me." Despite all the spiritual talk and the fact that he is the Son of God, Jesus engages diplomatically with the Roman who comes demanding tribute. As mentioned, Gnostic tradition here seems to tell us that one should not overvalue the physical world, but that does not mean they should abandon their interest with it completely. Everyone must still abide by the local laws and regulations, and so this might be why Jesus gives to Caesar what belongs to him, because this is what everyone at the time had to do. Jesus does not wish to be above everyone else. He wants to show them that he lives as they do, and whilst he has divine knowledge, he suffers their struggles too. Saying 101, Discipleship 2. Whoever doesn't hate their father and mother, as I do, can't become my disciple, and whoever doesn't love their father and mother, as I do, can't become my disciple. For my mother, but my true mother, gave me life. In this saying, Jesus effectively tells his disciples that they need to love and respect their parents, for they were the ones who gave life to them. If one cannot love and respect their parents, then it's arguable that they would not be able to love and respect the Divine Father, who in some sense is also responsible for one's existence. This isn't to say that a person has to get on with their parents. As Jesus tells us in saying 99, blood is not thicker than water. However, one's parents should still be viewed as sacred, for at the very least, being the catalyst for our very being. Saying 102, the dog in the feeding trough. Jesus said, "How awful for the Pharisees, who are like a dog sleeping in the feeding trough for cattle, because the dog doesn't eat, and doesn't let the cattle eat either." Jesus puts his sights on the Pharisees here, and compares them to dogs sleeping in the troughs for the cattle. In effect, he declares that they are of no use to anyone, and are, if anything, an obstacle to all around them. They don't eat the food in the trough that they sleep in, and because they are there, the cattle don't eat from the trough either. Ultimately, Jesus is quite scathing here, choosing to compare these people to dogs in the first place, and then almost mocking their very reason for being. Saying 103, the parables of the bandits. Jesus said, "Blessed is the one who knows where the bandits are going to enter. They can get up to assemble their defences and be prepared to defend themselves before they arrive." Here Jesus appears to take a leaf out of Sun Tzu's Art of War and provide some knowledge on strategy, or at least home security. Obviously, if we know where the bandits are going to enter from, we can prepare by laying traps or reinforce certain areas to discourage them from trespassing. Put simply, it is better to have knowledge than, say, brute strength. Saying 104, prayer and fasting. They said to Jesus, "Come, let's pray and fast today." Jesus said, "What have I done wrong? Have I failed? Rather, when the groom leaves the bridal chamber, then people should fast and pray." It's quite hard to decide what Jesus means here, but one idea is that Jesus is low-key offended that his followers have asked him to pray and fast. His tone is almost sarcastic, almost as if to say, "What have I done wrong? Why should I pray and fast?" He is the Son of God after all, and the embodiment of all that is good, so his praying and fasting is kind of redundant. But another idea is that Jesus doesn't see praying and fasting necessary at this time, because he is amongst them. And going back to saying 6, it may be he senses that they are only praying and fasting because they feel that they need to, not because they earnestly want to. Saying 105, knowing father and mother. Jesus said, "Whoever knows their father and mother will be called a bastard." What may be the message here is that sometimes the truth will always be denied. Jesus might be subtly venting his own frustrations here in that despite being the Son of God, people don't believe him, or worse yet, call him a liar. Jesus compares this to one knowing their mother and father, yet still being called a bastard. An insult might irk someone if it is true, but if the statement is not true, we may feel even more outraged that we are being faced with it, especially if the insult in question challenges our integrity. Saying 106, unity, 2. Jesus said, "When you make the two into one, you'll become children of humanity, and if you say mountain go away, it'll go." This likely links back to saying 22, where Jesus presents the Gnostic idea of two becoming one, that is to say, the spirit and the body becoming one. Once this is achieved, there is nothing that a person cannot do. Once they are balanced in both body and spirit, one can overcome even the most impossible of tasks. Saying 107, the parable of the lost sheep. Jesus said the kingdom can be compared to a shepherd who had 100 sheep. The largest one strayed. He left the 99 and looked for that one until he found it. Having gone through the trouble, he said to the sheep, "I love you more than the 99. Once more, Jesus compares the heavenly kingdom to something rather vague and ambiguous. It's possible he's referring to our own struggle in getting to the heavenly kingdom, and that those who do are the ones who go the extra mile. It would have been easy for the shepherd, who is us, to have given up on the missing sheep, which is the kingdom of heaven. After all, we would still have 99 sheep, which may be comparable to our earthly comforts. But it is those who strive to keep all essences, to unite everything in oneself, and go looking for the missing sheep, are those who will make it into the spiritual kingdom at the end of their journey. Saying 108, becoming like Jesus. Jesus said, "Whoever drinks from my mouth will become like me, and I myself will become like them. Then what's hidden will be revealed to them." Once more, Jesus may simply be referring to the idea that if one listens to the words that are coming out of his mouth, or drink from his mouth, then one will become like him. The knowledge he knows will become one's own knowledge. Saying 109, the parables of the hidden treasure. Jesus said the kingdom can be compared to someone who had a treasure hidden in their field. They didn't know about it. After they died, they left it to their son. The son didn't know it either. He took the field and sold it. The buyer ploughed the field, found the treasure, and began to loan money at interest to whomever they wanted. Yet another comparison by Jesus, where the heavenly kingdom becomes a treasure in a field that the owner doesn't know about. What the saying tries to tell us is that what we are looking for may already be close to us, perhaps as close as our backyard. Yet if we do not look, we cannot possibly hope to find such treasure, and may even end up unwittingly giving it away. Saying 110, Riches and Renunciation, 2. Jesus said, "Whoever has found the world and become rich should renounce the world." Much as saying 81 tells us to renounce power if we have not earned it, this saying by Jesus may be telling us that once we are of a certain privilege, we should withdraw from the world. Like many of the sayings, this one isn't entirely understood, and can either be a caution to those who are rich, to stop them from meddling in affairs that they do not understand, or maybe a suggestion that they should enjoy what they have and not take any more. Saying 111, Those who are living won't die, 2. Jesus said, "The heavens and the earth will roll up in front of you, and whoever lives from the living one won't see death." Doesn't Jesus say, "Whoever finds themselves, of them the world isn't worthy"? Here Jesus tells his disciples that the heavens will find those who are worthy, and those who have lived by his words. Those who have lived as the living one, or God, had intended, will not know of death, and it is likely that they will continue onto the spiritual kingdom. Saying 112, Flesh and Soul. Jesus said, "How awful for the flesh that depends on the soul, how awful for the soul that depends on the flesh." Yet another throwback, Jesus refers to saying 87, where he deems it miserable for one's soul to depend on their body, and for one's body to depend on the soul. Here in saying 112, he makes it clear that the two are supposed to work in tandem, and like much of the Gnostic belief found in this gospel, the two must become one. Saying 113, the kingdom is already present. His disciples said to him, "When will the kingdom come?" Jesus said, "It won't come by looking for it." They won't say, "Look over here," or "Look over there." Rather, the Father's kingdom is already spread out over the earth, and people don't see it. Once more, Jesus reiterates everything he's been telling his disciples thus far. In fact, this is similar to saying 51, where they ask him when the new world will come. Jesus tells them once again that the kingdom is already here. It is spread out all over the earth, but nobody can perceive it, or perhaps more accurately, no one is worthy enough. It's not necessarily that they don't see it, but perhaps more so that they choose not to. In order to see it, the spirit and the body must become whole, but evidently this is easier said than done, and with Jesus not really supplying any practical ways to achieve this, it's no wonder that no one has. Saying 114, Peter and Mary. Simon Peter said to them, "Mary should leave us, because women aren't worthy of life." Jesus said, "Look, am I to make her a man, so that she may become a living spirit too? She's equal to you men, because every woman who makes herself manly will enter the kingdom of heaven." The Gospel of Thomas saves perhaps the most controversial saying until last. Indeed, it would seem that Jesus is defensive of women, and chastises Simon Peter after his flippant remark that women are not worthy of life. Jesus doesn't hide his annoyance, and even challenges Simon Peter with rhetoric, asking him, "Should I make her a man instead?" He doesn't conclude with sarcasm, however, and instead decisively puts Simon Peter in his place, telling him that women are equal to men. But interestingly, Jesus decrees that every woman who makes themselves manly will enter the kingdom of heaven. And this is where the controversy starts. The Gnostic idea that one shouldn't be attached to the concept of gender is thrown out of the window here, because evidently, being manly is a required trait for entering the kingdom of heaven. Yet there's also an implication here that women who do not adopt a manly side will be denied eternal glory. Some might say that Jesus kind of shoots down his own point here about equality, if manliness is the token by which entry is granted. but it might also be said that Jesus was considering the unfairness of the world at the time, where women were considered secondary. In a man's world, it could be that Jesus wished to enable women with a certain manliness in order to compete with their counterparts, almost like he was encouraging a level playing field, with women being like men in order to even the odds between them. In any case, women who become like men in this example will enter the heavenly kingdom, perhaps on the grounds of being more bold, standing up for themselves, and overcoming the daunting gender differences that were prevalent at the time. On the other hand, you might consider the more simple notion here, that the Gospel of Thomas's Jesus does deep down view women as lesser, which is why he wants them to adopt more stereotypical masculine traits, as opposed to men adopting more stereotypical feminine traits. Much of what we've read so far from the Gospel of Thomas doesn't seem too intrusive of traditional Christianity. Yes, there are some pretty ambiguous and obscure sentiments that are lost on us even now, but there isn't necessarily anything heretical or damning about any of the content. It seems the Jesus of this Gospel aimed to weave in the spiritual essence of his religion with real-world advice, marrying the two together in the hopes of presenting some ideas that would be taken seriously. That being said, much of what we've read is heavily open to interpretation, and when we consider the Gnostic undertones, some might see it as not being wholly congruent with the New Testament, or the Jesus that most people know of today. The Gospel of Thomas's Jesus is actually full of sass. He's witty, he's sarcastic, and when someone steps out of line, it isn't beneath him to mock them first before telling them why they're wrong. In some instances, you might say that this was a more realistic Jesus, a Jesus who, though was above mankind, wasn't above being a little petty here and there. Personally, I can see why such a text wasn't included in the traditional Bible, simply for its abstruse and often cryptic nature alone. But it's also possible that the entire book lacks several attributes that the Church deemed were necessary to qualify it for a place within the Holy Book. In one sense, it lacked apostolic authority. Thomas the Apostle might have been Jesus' brother in this Gospel and in some Gnostic belief, but such a relationship is not detailed elsewhere. The Church required a certain type of evidence to validate the Gospels as being the legitimate word of Jesus, and while such evidence was supplied by the likes of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, others, including Thomas, appear to have missed the mark. Scholarly consensus, even as far back as the 2nd century, appears to agree that there is no legitimacy of the Gospel of Thomas, and that not only are these likely not the words of Jesus, but that they were not even penned by Thomas himself. The belief is that many of the sayings found in this document are inspired by the sayings found in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, and at times there seems to be some reliance upon these Gospels. Indeed, only someone who had access to all 4 of these Gospels would be able to write such a piece like the Gospel of Thomas, and considering that it would have taken ages for all 4 pieces to have circulated the Roman Empire, it seems likely that it was written many years after Jesus' supposed existence. Secondly, the Church deemed that the Gospel of Thomas lacked divine quality. It lacked the evidence to convince the Church that the words on its pages contain the essence of God. Furthermore, considering it was found amongst other Gnostic texts in the Nag Hammadi discovery, it was, perhaps unfairly, regarded as guilty by association. Gnosticism, after all, taught that there was an evil deity, that there was secret knowledge, as discussed in the Gospel of Thomas, and that there was emphasis that Jesus was not physical, but spiritual, thus not having a human body and not dying on the cross. If a gospel is to have divine quality, evidence that shows it has come from the lips of God, it definitely should not contradict the other gospels that do have the divine quality. The Gospel of Thomas does this through its Gnostic undertones and ideas, some of which are more blatant than others, including the pursuit of secret knowledge over the pursuit of faith. The motivations of Thomas are therefore dramatically different to the motivations of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, with the former preaching that salvation came from obtaining secret knowledge and the combining of the spirit and the soul, and the latter preaching that salvation came from righteousness, faith and virtue. You can see this also in Jesus' attitude in the Gospel of Thomas. He seems pretty laid back about faith, fasting, and even prayer, encouraging his followers not to bother if they don't really want to, and to instead seek truth. Lastly, the church also considered the Gospels corporate reception, before qualifying them for the Bible. Simply put, if the other churches around the world were not giving the thumbs up on the Gospel of Thomas, then chances were it wasn't going to get the green light into the Bible. Considering that the Gospel of Thomas lacked both apostolic authority and divine quality, most churches would have been quick to disregard it entirely on the merit that it wasn't legitimate and wasn't congruent. Such a gospel wouldn't have warranted much attention at all, and for the most part, these books could be enjoyed by the church and by religious audiences, but not taken seriously. Of course, this is where the Gospel of Thomas finds itself in deep water, because it wasn't just dismissed as illegitimate and false, it was dismissed as heretical and even damaging. 4th century Greek historian Eusebius actually made note of the Gospel of Thomas's banishment, saying, "It ought not to be reckoned with, even among the spurious books, but discarded as impious and absurd." Let me know what you thought about today's episode on the new series of Lost and Forbidden Biblical books. Also, don't forget to check out Teach Hanley's skincare products with my exclusive link in the description, where you can get 30% off your first order and a free gift. And as always, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more content just like this. Until next time.